Okay. Well, thanks everyone for your patience and for sticking around for this to get going. Um, Let me share my screen so I can pull up my slides. So today's presentation is going to be about how to talk to kids about sex. So there's me, I'm Camille, your presenter. I've been a counselor for about a decade, working primarily in social services. I was also a foster home licensor for a number of years, as well as a foster parent for a number of years, and then also have 3 children of my own. I'm a trauma-informed caregiving specialist for the Alliance, so I'm someone you can reach out to for support there. Um, the topic we're covering today comes up in all areas I've worked with families, women, children. This can be a sensitive topic for some people, so please, if something's triggering you, you're just noticing that you're feeling upset, activated, just take a step away. It's fine. I am currently in the process of becoming certified to be a certified sexual health educator, and so this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. So the things we're going to be talking about today are sexual developmental milestones, how brain development plays a key role in sexual development and communication about it, pornography, consent, how to have effective communication with your kids, and then we'll have a Q&A section. So some things I want you to consider getting into this topic is, what is your motivator behind learning how to communicate effectively about sex and things pertaining to that? Common motivators that caregivers have are they want their child to have accurate information from them rather than inaccurate information that comes from friends online or at school. And then also consider, what does comprehensive sex education mean to you? Do you think it's just talking about the birds and the bees, or is there more to it? So most people have a little bit of a different answer to that question. What does comprehensive sex education mean to you? And at the end, we're going to check in again about this question. From my foundation of this presentation is from the premise that comprehensive sex education teaches children how to keep their bodies safe from predators, to understand physiologically how their bodies work and are developing, to normalize the feelings and urges that they're having, children, as they are having and making good decisions, consent, using appropriate language, having safe sex emotionally and physically, and to just consider that it's about a lot more than just the act of sex and preventing pregnancies. We're just going to be scratching the surface in this presentation. This is a really big, vast, deep topic, and I hope to at least have you walking away with some tools to navigate some conversations. So, language to consider as we're getting into this is sex, the definition of that word. So it referring to sex as penetration alone excludes some people's sexual orientation or physical disabilities, and also doesn't consider the safety measures that must be considered at varying degrees of sexual orientations or interactions. So if we consider same-sex couples or one person is a quadriplegic, or we consider in both of those scenarios, there may or may not be penetration, but those couples may consider themselves to be having sex. This is important also because if we think about teenagers, kids that are starting to have oral sex, they might not think they are because it's not penetration. However, that could be considered sex for some people. So we want to really expand our mind of how we're looking at that word. And then sexual orientation is romantic or sexual attraction patterns specifically. to people or a gender, not necessarily one gender. And then someone's sexuality is a broader scope of sexual orientation. It goes beyond attraction. It includes fantasies, attitudes towards sex, and it really can be fluid over time. Sexuality acknowledges the diversity and complexity of the human experience and includes aspects beyond attraction. And we're not going to talk today about gender orientation. We're only going to be talking about sexual orientation and sexuality. So some more things to think about before you start having these conversations with kids in your care is how do you feel talking about this subject? What emotions come up for you? Do you notice that you're feeling shame, discomfort, embarrassment? Where did these feelings come from? Really think back to, historically, when you started having those uncomfortable feelings, either in your body, you might notice a certain sensation. Also, consider how do you want your child to feel when talking with a safe adult about sex so that they can get accurate and healthy and safe information for themselves. Also, pay attention to the fact that there's a difference between shame and discomfort. We can be uncomfortable talking about sex and things pertaining to it because society says that's not something we talk about openly or publicly. So discomfort is different than their shame, and that's something that's rooted in a specific cause, a specific reason. Some things that can contribute to shame we'll get into a little bit later on. This next section. So some areas where people may have shame ingrained in them can be from your home environment, where there was negative conversations or lack of conversations about sex and sexuality. And this can often be from parents who are anxious or avoidant about talking about this subject themselves. So that sends a message to kids that this is shameful. This is something we should not be talking about because it's wrong. Another place that shame can be ingrained in people pertaining to sex and sexuality is extended family and the community. Extended family and circles reinforce normative behavior. So thinking into, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, the school community, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, baseball team, where you're involved in the community, what is their perception of healthy sex and sexuality? And then religious organizations, religious authorities rely on conformity for social cohesion and the preservation of the status quo. And so depending on the culture, depending on the religion, depending on the church, depending on the priest, depending on a lot of factors within the religious institution can really heavily influence how one person, one family, generations even can really shape if shame is present for them around this topic. And then school educators. So typically sex education is part of health class starting around 5th grade in Washington State. And so that can impose certain belief systems on kids based on what kind of curriculum they're being provided with. And what type of education or what type of curriculum is provided to kids in the schools is largely driven by politics. So if the schools, I won't get into all of that, but they can be paid a stipend for using a specific curriculum, or if they choose to not use that curriculum from the government, then they don't get that stipend. And so one has a lot more comprehensive information and the other does not. One thing that I would encourage everyone to do is go to your school district and ask for a copy of the health class information that's going to be presented to your child, so you have a chance to go through it to determine, hey, I agree with this stuff, I don't agree with this stuff, and just have a conversation with them before they go through the classes and then afterwards. And we'll talk today about some tips on how to have those conversations. So some thoughts around when to have these conversations. We want these conversations to be successful. And so really being strategic about how you do that is important. First, plan your conversation. When I'm talking about planning your conversation, that's going to be more for the kids like 10 and up, when there's going to be a little bit more in-depth information, and we're going to go into sexual developmental milestones and what to cover. But when we're having those more lengthy conversations, then we're going to want to pick a time where there's no time constraints, not a stressful day. Let's say you plan to do it tomorrow night, but the day blew up and something happened to disrupt, reschedule it for another day when things are going to be more calm. Make sure there's a diversion if needed that won't detract from listening. So a diversion would be something that they can kind of fidget with, or maybe go for a drive to have the conversation, or maybe you can be sitting there coloring together or playing a video game together, doing something where they can have their eyes focus on something other than you to take away from that discomfort from them if they're experiencing discomfort. And even if you're going to be experiencing discomfort, you want something else to be focusing on while still being able to have an active, engaging conversation. And then also just having it be a one-on-one conversation so that other kids in the home can't interject with their thoughts and opinions. And so it's private and they just feel more like they can be comfortable disclosing if that's something they want to do. Also consider, we're going to be talking about sexual development from birth to 18, but consider when to insert micro conversations and comments to normalize these topics. So we'll give some examples of when to do that later on. For children that are new in your care, one thing to consider is that to preface that, hey, just want to let you know in our home, we try to really be open and honest, talking about bodies and body safety. And with that, let's talk about, we'll get into examples later on. But we really want to get to the point where some of those micro conversations are so casual that you can have them sitting at the dinner table. Which may sound impossible right now, but I'm hoping when we're done here, it can seem a little bit more manageable. If this is really, really important, if you have a child who's come into your care that has a history of sexual abuse, these conversations may not be able to actually happen in your home. They may need to be led by a therapist. You do not want to create triggers for unresolved trauma they may have from potential sexual assault. And you definitely don't want them to get the wrong idea of your intent behind bringing these up. And so you want to be really clear if someone comes into your care and there's any language whatsoever about exposure or definitive sexual assault that happened, sexual abuse, really follow up with the caseworker or the case manager, social worker, really follow up with the appropriate person on the team to find out what is appropriate conversations to have in the home or to not. So something else to consider when we are starting in on these conversations is thinking back to those reflective questions I asked you earlier. When you begin these conversations, start off by sharing how you're feeling bringing it up. If you're uncomfortable in any way, this will help them know it's not because of them. It's not something to be ashamed to talk about. This is just uncomfortable for you if it is. And also validate that sexual development is normal, natural part of the human experience. It's nothing to be ashamed of. All kids go through it. Every single human goes through it. Explain to the child that shame versus discomfort are two different things. So normalizing that this can be uncomfortable to talk about, but that doesn't mean it's something that's bad to talk about as long as we're doing it in a healthy, age-appropriate way. So with a 4-year-old, it may sound like, I know this is silly to talk about our body parts, but it's really important for safety. So we're just being really lighthearted about it and, oh, it's just silly, it feels silly, versus a 15-year-old saying, when I was your age, we didn't talk about this stuff at all. So it's really hard for me to do, but I want you to be able to talk to me about anything. even this because it's really important. So really being vulnerable yourself and sharing that, that discomfort might be there and it's not because of that. We really want to impose that on them. It's not because of you. If that's something you're struggling with, you can still also validate that, hey, this might be uncomfortable for you. That's okay. We'll just, get through it. Um, and then we want to consider what are some good times to have these types of conversations. So first thinking about, we want kids to know what to expect, what's going to be happening. Because kids' bodies are changing over time and very quickly at certain ages and stages, this requires a lot of conversations over the years, starting early on. When children, toddler to early school age, we're teaching them how to keep their bodies safe and how to label body parts with anatomically correct language. This is very important for their safety. Middle school, we're starting to discuss consent and puberty, just all those changes going on in their body. In boys, it's difficult to know when exactly puberty is coming. There's changes that slowly happen over time rather than any one singular event versus girls. It's very sequential. They typically get their period. That's a very monumental moment. And then their breasts start to develop in their hips. Like it's very sequential. It's a lot more obvious. The ages when this is onset varies greatly. But considering the puberty piece and consent, those are also other pieces of having these sex conversations. And then once we get into high school, there's just a lot more conversations about everything. So next, we're going to be looking at the sexual developmental milestones based on age ranges. And it's really important to normalize developmentally appropriate changes in behaviors. So we really want to help kids feel familiar with the changes that are happening in their bodies. We don't want them to be feeling any surprises like, oh my gosh, why is there hair in my armpits? Or, oh my gosh, why am I stinky? Like, we don't want them to feel like they have to hide it. Like it's something to be embarrassed of because they don't know what's wrong with them. We want to give them that heads up. And so that takes some close monitoring, right? To be able, if you're starting to notice, oh, I'm a little bit stinky, or if you're starting to see when they've got their arms up, I think that hair is looking a little bit longer. There's clues and cues that start to happen to tell you, okay, it's time to start this conversation. And those conversations happen over and over and over again. It's very similar to when we have newborns. If you've had a newborn before, they can't talk to us, right? They can't talk to us. We have to read those nonverbal cues. We have to read their body language. We rely on interpreting the different types of cries that they have and watching a child for physical development that's indicating signs of puberty. It's very similar because they're not always going to just outwardly tell us what's going on, especially if it's not a biological child of yours that maybe hasn't been in your care for very long. We really need to start paying attention to their body. And as a mom of 3, I know that even if they've been in your care from the moment they came out of your womb, they're not always going to just be automatically sharing that information. Something else to consider is when kids are starting to explore their bodies, because it's changing, right? And they're curious, and their thoughts and feelings pertain to sex and their sexuality is changing. They're not doing this to upset us or trigger us. They're doing what they're driven to feel and do, unless something has happened to them, like they've been sexually abused. And even then, the drive is still there. Innately because of their sexual development and also potentially because of what happened to them, but there's still a drive for some reason. So this is a really important piece. The kids are not trying to upset us or trigger us by exploring and discovering their bodies as they're changing. They have no control over what's happening to their bodies. It happens to everybody's bodies. We have an opportunity to teach and support them as they're going through these changes. This should not include shaming them for any reason whatsoever. When we shame our children at any age for their sexuality, we are teaching them to shame themselves and potentially shutting down their own connection to themselves for a very long time. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been a counselor for about a decade, and I've done a lot of counseling with women who experience perinatal mood disorders. I love working with moms that have postpartum depression, anxiety, PTSD. And it's really shocking how many women have this deep ingrained shame relating to their sexuality simply because of what they were taught early on. And so we have such an incredible opportunity as caregivers to really undo that shame if it was put there before they were in your care, or to teach them this is nothing to be ashamed of. This is just a natural part of life. We can teach kids boundaries without teaching them shame. A lot of times, kind of the old school mentality was the way to teach kids how to be in control of their bodies as they get sexual urges is to do it with shame. Shame them into submission, shame them into abstinence, shame them into not doing whatever it is, masturbating, whatever the thing is you think they shouldn't, quote unquote, shouldn't be doing. But research over the years has shown us that that does not prevent sexual exploration, masturbation, pregnancy. It just affects people's cognition. So helping children better understand physically what is happening to their bodies as they change normalizes what they're going through and helps reduce that shame. So all that to get ready for this. Sexual developmental milestones for birth to 3 years old. I'm curious if this is surprising to anyone to know that sexual developmental milestones begin at birth. That can be a rhetorical question or not. You can reply if you want in the chat section. But a lot of people are surprised by this, but let's get into them. So early on, they're learning about love and trust through touching and holding. So they're learning what a safe touch looks like and feels like with a trusted caregiver. Sucking, the need for oral satisfaction. We know from imaging that babies start doing this when they're in utero. They can suck their thumb, suck their tongue. They start to learn spontaneous reflexive responses, like having erections, vaginal lubrication. That is just developmentally what starts to happen even as early as under a year old. Gender identity starts to develop. Children know their gender identities regardless of their assigned sex at birth. And then gender role conditioning starts to happen. So boys and girls treated differently. You know, girls wear pink, boys wear blue, girls play with Barbies, boys play with G.I. Joe, things like that. Exploration of their own body, hands, feet, tummy, genitals. So like babies finding their feet at 5 months is a developmental milestone. Babies finding their hands, like meaning they're putting it in their mouth and sucking on them, is a developmental milestone between 3 and 5 months. Being on their tummy is a developmental milestone 0 to 3 months. And then discovering and playing with their genitals, boys and girls, that's in the toddler years at some point. So these are all just normal developmental milestones. Let's think about that though. If babies start to grab their hands and discover their hands, and the parents are cheering, yay, and then they start to grab their feet and yay, and then they can be on their tummy for tummy time, yay, but then they grab their genitals. Oh, don't do that, that's bad. Even though they're like driven for that. They're driven for that type of exploration. They can't help it. It's a part of their natural development and reaching their milestones. At this age, they may enjoy nudity, just having clothes off. I always called my kids my diaper babies because they love to run around in just their diapers. This is when we start to introduce toilet training. Kids at this age start to have curiosity about differences between body parts and curiosity about siblings and their parents' bodies. So they may notice like mom's body is a little bit different than mine. They can't articulate it very well, but they definitely are starting to notice. And then this is what we're starting to teach them at this age. So we are first teaching them how to keep their body safe. And what that looks like is any area that a bathing suit covers, no one should touch unless it's a trusted adult or a doctor. So that's something we can be talking with them from early on. That's just normal language that we can be having with them. We're teaching them to have autonomy of their body, that they can be in charge of who touches their body by not forcing children to hug people they don't want to. So, oftentimes when I see pictures of the kids on Santa's lap where the kids are just screaming, they're screaming. That makes me really sad to see because the message I see that's happening is, I know you don't feel safe for this person, but I'm going to make you sit on their lap anyways. That's not teaching children autonomy of their body. And that's doing the opposite of how to keep their body safe. At this stage, if they're touched appropriately, it is important that they have anatomically, or touched inappropriately, it's important that they have anatomically correct language to report. So a lot of families have certain names that they call body parts. The wee wee, the woo woo. I remember Oprah called her vagina the vajayjay. Like people have nicknames for penis, vulva, vagina. And that is not going to be super helpful when there's potentially sexual abuse or assault. They're inappropriately touched and they need to report it to someone. So that's really, really important for safety. So that can start as early on as you're teaching them their elbows and their eyes and their ears and their belly button. It's just another part of their body. And this is another way that we can also help not have shame attached to those body parts as we talk about those body parts the same way we would any other body part. Teaching children about safe touches and grooming. So statistically, 1 out of 4 to 6 kids are sexually assaulted. That is a fact. Discussing this with your child will not cause them to be sexually assaulted. It will help prevent it and improve those statistics. So often parents don't want to talk about this because they're afraid it means it's going to happen. Or they don't want to talk about it because it makes them so uncomfortable. And yet we don't know who the predators are. And the only way that we can help protect kids is if we give them the tools to do that for themselves, which starts right here, birth to 3. So, so you can already see if we're starting these conversations early on by when they're on the changing table, there's your elbow, there's your penis, there's your belly button, right? We're eliminating that shame. So it's all those this is an example of those micro little conversations. So can anyone think of anything else birth to 3 that they think would be important to talk with their kids about pertaining to their body? What I'm hoping you're thinking right now, I hope this is expanding the scope of when you think about talking to kids about sex. It goes so far beyond just those sex conversations with teenagers about don't have sex or use protection with sex. It's so much broader than that. This is a life for kids and then continues into adult relationships too. But we're just focusing on kids tonight. So then the next age range for developmental milestones is 4 to 9. So this is considered late childhood. So childhood sexual play is common at this age. Playing doctor, I'll show you mine if you show me yours, or playing house. It's just oftentimes rooted in curiosity. They're starting to learn gender roles, so how they're supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to behave like a boy or girl, because our society likes to put those labels on the boy and the girl, and then they fall into those gender roles. And so that's when we start to see that conformity start to happen. They start to learn bathroom vocabulary, so wiping for girls, make sure you wipe your vulva really good, front to back, stuff like that. Ask questions. A lot of times this is when kids are starting to ask questions like, where did the baby come from and how was it born? And they'll ask about animals too, like, where did the kittens come from? It's not just related to humans, but they'll start to have those questions. And then begin to distinguish acceptable and unacceptable behavior. So they may start to know, like, I like how it feels when I touch my penis, but I'm only going to do that when I'm in the bathroom. That's not something we do out in public because mom or dad have told me that. Possibility of masturbation and self-stimulation. This is in boys and girls. And again, keep in mind they are driven to do this. This is a natural part of their developmental milestones. The same as it is in the 4 to 9-year-old range, they've moved from like parallel play to playing with their peers and running and jumping together. That's another developmental milestone. This is just one specific to their sexual development. So we really want to give them the freedom to do that and have conversations about how to do that. They may start to become more modest about their own body. So rather than when they were a diaper baby and as a toddler, now they want to have a shirt on instead of running around the house shirtless. Media influences, understanding about gender through social and family roles and messaging is starting to happen. So as they're watching movies, seeing people out in public, they're starting to create roles in their head about what people should and should not look like for attraction. And then sexual orientation for some starts to form by 4 years old. That's a lifelong trajectory or journey, I guess, for some people. It can change over time. Sexual orientation can be, like I said earlier, it can be fluid, but for some kids, it's definitely starting and showing up. And then at this age, we are still teaching them how to keep their body safe. So these are the types of conversations we're having with them, knowing that this is where they're at developmentally. So having conversations with them about how to keep their body safe, teaching them what to do if there are unsafe touches, and how to continue to have autonomy of their body. Think about relevant times to have these conversations. Examples would be before they go to a swim party. So, okay, we're going to Susie's swim party today at the Y. Remember, any part of your body that your swimsuit covers, no one should touch. And let's say, Johnny's dad is next to you and you feel his hand under your bathing suit and he says, oh, that was an accident. I was just trying to help you stay close to the wall. Teaching them what to do in that circumstance and how to get away immediately. Do not let an adult convince them that it was an accident, I didn't mean to, or, oh, it's fine because you're my niece or my nephew. There's a very high incidence of sexual abuse that happens within families. It's oftentimes someone that they know. And so we certainly don't want to put that fear in kids. We don't need to use that language at all, especially not at this age, but we absolutely can use language of how to get away and how they know what a safe and unsafe touch is. You can even practice with them safe and unsafe touch. Well, in an appropriate way. Before deciding if they can go to sleepover with a friend or before going to a friend's house, giving them tools like when you go to the bathroom, make sure you lock the door or make sure you announce, hey, I'm going to the bathroom, so no one accidentally walks in there and says they didn't know. If they are going to go to a sleepover, making sure they are doing things like not sharing a bed with someone, they have their own sleep space. You as the caregiver can make sure to communicate that to the responsible adult that you want your child to be sleeping in their own sleeping bag, their own bed, things like that. So you're having these conversations, you're normalizing these conversations as these circumstances come up. And so it should be uncomfortable. You should be able to, at the dinner table, be like, oh, okay, you're going to Susie's swim party tomorrow. Remember, da da da, these are the safety things. Also at this age, considering if a child doesn't want to hug someone, help them try to articulate using emotion coaching why they don't want to hug that person, and then again continue to promote that body autonomy. So by this age, 4 to 9, we should be teaching them emotion words so that they can communicate what they're feeling. And so we want to get them to a point at this age, 4 to 9, where they can say, I didn't want to hug I'll just keep saying Johnny. I didn't want to hug Uncle Johnny because he smells like cigarettes. Okay, that's fine. You don't like how he smells. I don't want to hug um, Uncle Frank because I feel creepy. I feel icky. That's not an emotion, but it's a feeling they have, right? We want to really respect that and really praise them for paying attention to their body not wanting that. Um, or they could say, I don't want to hug Uncle Frank because I feel scared, and then getting the reason behind that. So, um, and then from around the age of 9, some kids could be already starting to show signs of puberty. This can include things like body odor, acne, budding nipples in boys and girls, and menstrual cycles. This is a good time to introduce these topics if you see warning signs of early puberty. And I have those conversations in the next age category, but there are definitely some 9-year-olds that start early puberty. We're actually seeing that more and more early indicators of puberty. See a question. What about when children want to be cuddled or sleeping next to each other, for example, at a sleepover? How would you address that? That's a great question. So I want to put it back to you of what would you be comfortable with and how would you make sure that child stays safe? There's a couple things we have to assess. If it's a sibling, if it's a cousin, what's the familiarity? How do you know this is a safe person? How would they know to get out of the situation if it starts to feel unsafe? So there's a lot of things to consider. And to some degree, there just has to be trust that's given, right? Like you have someone's trust until they break it, or you don't have someone's trust until they earn it. I hope that answers your question. I know that when I was in high school, I had a best friend from the time I was 9, and she's still my best friend. And we always slept in the same bed together, and it was, it was fine. And my mom never talked to me about consent, and I don't know how I would have known to get out of an unsafe situation as a child. So I think it's really about giving them that information. And then at this age, we're still continuing to use anatomically correct language. Think of relevant times to use this in a casual way, picking out bathing suits and clothes, doctor appointments, personal hygiene. So being able to say, I like that bathing suit because it covers up that your nipples are starting to grow out a little bit, if they want that to be covered, or asking that question because you have some budding nipples going on. Do you feel comfortable with that, or do you want to try to hide that a little bit with your bathing suit? Or You know, when you're teaching kids how to wipe, like we're continuing to use language. If you're having these conversations every single time it's relevant, it becomes a lot more comfortable as the children get older than if we don't start having these conversations until they're teenagers and we're only talking about sex. Some really great books that I recommend are this first one, Your Body Belongs to You by Cornelia Spellman. I have that book. I've used it with lots of clients. It's a wonderful book. It is very age appropriate. The pictures are clear, easy to understand language, and it's just a great tool to sit down and talk to kids about that topic of how to keep their body safe and to really normalize that that's just something that we do with kids. If you have kids starting to ask the questions of where do babies come from and how is that my sister? And if we have mixed families, you know, a lot of different things like that. This is also really good. It's not about the story. So really kid friendly, but detailed pictures. It has like from conception until 40 weeks, the development of a baby. It shows what happens in the mom's body. It just has some really great language and images. Anything in this age range that's surprising to anybody or not what you expected?
I wasn't going to say surprising, but one other thing is talking with kids about if they are using terminology and accurate names for their body parts when they're going to school and they're interacting with children who have not had those conversations with their families about how to navigate that, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great question and just thing to point out. The how much kids are taught and in what way they're taught is so different, right? And that is a huge motivating factor why a lot of caregivers and parents make the decision that they want to be the educator because they want their child, they know how they want their child to receive information. And so you could say to your child, you know, we call it exactly what's in the anatomy book. Like we call it exactly what medically it is. And some families, they pick pet names or silly names and like wee wee and woo woo and the JJ and that's okay too. I just in our home we use this accurate language because it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's another body part and that's how I would explain it, that it's okay if other people use different language. They don't need to draw attention to it. They don't need to be like, hey, that's not the right word. Um, if you have a child that doesn't feel comfortable using that language in front of others, not that they're typically going to be discussing those body parts, then maybe asking them like, when you're interacting with friends, what would be a comfortable terminology for you? How would you, does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. How would you explain to the child how important it is for them to not teach other children? That's a great question. So, um, I'm trying to think of an analogy. Here's a good analogy, I think. You tell me if you think differently. So, babies, like most kids know babies. Babies start to crawl anywhere or start to walk. I'll use the example of walking. Babies start to walk anywhere between 6 months and 18 months. 6 months is a little bit early, 18 months is a little bit late, but anywhere in there, we're still going to be considering developmentally appropriate. And it's up to, and so we can compare this to that parents and caregivers will introduce information when they think the kid is ready, and that's going to be different for every child. And so if you have a friend who doesn't know what you know yet, maybe they're not quite ready to learn that, and it's not our job to give them that information. That's their parents' job, or that's the caregiver's job. And if we're not into the ages yet of when they're getting health class, getting this information in school, but even then, the parents have signed off on it. Like, kids are not able to attend health class without a signature from a parent. That's not true. You have to actually excuse them from it with a signature. Otherwise, they are going to automatically be in it. But just letting them know, like, leave it up to the parents to decide when the child is ready. Every child is different. And you and I, we know that some of these kids that are in care, that are in the foster care system, they grow up much, much sooner than other kids. They have seen things, heard things much sooner than they should have. And so when we consider that too, um, they might just know more than other kids their age. And it's just not their job to be teaching this to their friends. They can be teaching their friends how to color and play games, and not this. It's not their job. Does that answer your question? And then someone asked, I'm wondering, why do you think that's not okay? Or maybe this person was asking the above person to teach other children. I wouldn't trust that a kid is going to teach it accurately. I mean, this is a progression. This is something that they're learning over time, and they're really starting to make sense of it in their mind. Um, if they naturally come into a conversation about that when they're playing with dolls or whatever, then that's going to happen. We don't want them to feel shame around it. And there's some developmental appropriateness there too. Okay. So the next age range is 10 to 18, which is a huge age range. A lot happens in those years. But 10 is when those hormones start to come into play. So here's some things we want to consider. The first is brain development. So the prefrontal cortex, which is right under your forehead, it's not fully developed until your mid-20s. It's the last part of the brain to develop. Teens use their gut reaction, emotional amygdala very often. That's why we see those mood swings. Since the amygdala and rational cortex aren't fully hooked up yet, it's hard for them to work through emotions in a productive way, so there's more risk taking. And one of the benefits of this developing prefrontal cortex is that it makes kids a lot more adaptable than when their prefrontal cortex is fully developed. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for analyzing things, decision making, judgment. So when that's not fully developed, that's where we see a lot of that risk taking with teenagers. That's why we see a lot of that impulsivity. That's why we see them making bad decisions, not paying attention to time, because that brain is still developing, that part of the brain. And then ADHD and trauma can make impulse control even harder. Okay, so we really want to factor in when we're thinking about sexual development as their hormones are starting to get flowing and those natural desires they have are starting to creep in. We really want to consider where the brain development is at and their critical thinking skills. And something else, just, you know, most of the kids in your care, if not all of them, are going to come to you with trauma. So that is going to make the sexual development for a lot of them a little bit more tumultuous than a child that doesn't have trauma. So some things that you can do to help increase their critical thinking skills. So asking questions that matter pertaining to a specific topic. So let's think of a topic. Curfew. Let's talk about curfew. So let's say we have a 16-year-old just got driver's license. You're negotiating curfew. What time do you think that you should be home? And then you're hoping they're going to factor in, well, what time they have to get up in the morning, how much sleep they had the night before, right? So you're prompting these questions. You're asking them to evaluate what they hear. So you're asking for them to paraphrase back to you, checking for clarification, you're checking for understanding. You're questioning their source of information. So if they said pertain to curfew, well, everyone else who's 16 gets to stay out until 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, who told you that? Where did you get that information? And you want them to do that too. Like, how do you know that that's a fact? And then ask them to do research. I don't know how you would research curfew. Maybe like go to Google and do, I don't know, ask what's the average curfew time. I don't know, but asking them to really consider both sides of a situation. Telling them to ask themselves, am I right in this situation? And then why? We want them to work on their strengths and then improve their weaknesses. So if a strength of theirs is following the rules, but a weakness is paying attention to time, then the strength is they understand the rule is they have to be home by midnight. So we're going to support the weakness by helping them set an alarm on their watch and their phone with 30 minutes heads up and then 15 minutes heads up. You got to be home soon. And then we repeat this process over and over and over again with a lot of different areas to build that prefrontal cortex up, to improve their critical thinking, their judgment. So if we consider that they have to use low rationalizing, struggles with judgment, struggles with decision making, if we apply that to sexual health, making sexual decisions, what could you conclude? And then we layer on their probable trauma, which makes it even harder for them to use critical thinking skills. So a conclusion could be, I think a very accurate conclusion could be that it's going to be hard for them. They're going to need opportunities to talk through and walk through all the different steps of their journey of learning sexual expression and having sexual relationships. And that starts from as early on as, do I let someone touch my stomach? Do I let them kiss me? If we look at this picture right here, like, is she okay with him touching her neck? Is that something she's comfortable with? And what does she do if she's not? Like, these are critical thinking skills. How do I make him stop if I don't like this? She looks like she likes it, but does she have those tools to be able to get out of that situation? Or does she have the tools to be able to say to him when she wants him to stop? If he has his hand moving up a little bit, does she have the tools to be able to say to him, don't move your hands any further up? Does she have the judgment to be able to know when things need to stop and slow down? Yeah. So here's our sexual developmental milestones. So keeping in mind where their brains are at with their prefrontal cortex. Sexual developmental milestones for 10 to 18. The adolescent years are puberty changes are definitely happening, physical and emotional. So we start to see those hormones ramping up. Menstruation or sperm production begins. Still possibility of masturbation. So in the last developmental age range, masturbation was happening more out of curiosity. It's just like, oh, if I do this, it feels good. And if I do this, it makes this body part change. now it's more of a cognizant thing, and it's not as frequent necessarily, but it's definitely, they're very cognizant of the actions they're having. They start to have pleasure from kissing and touching. So it goes from like, I'm going to give, you know, my little sister, my little brother a kiss and a hug because I love them, to now they're kissing and touching because it makes them feel good. Greater awareness of their own sexual identity and that of others around them. So they're just starting to have more concrete thoughts around what gender preferences they have, what type of features they might find attractive about someone, what types of personality traits about someone they might be attracted to. Yeah, just forming those ideas and those thoughts. And that's how they're forming their sexual identity. There is a possibility of sexual activity. If we keep in mind the definition from the beginning of sex in the United States, that's largely defined as penetration. But the definition is actually much, much broader. And then the sexual orientation continues to develop. And then possibility of pregnancy becomes possible if having penetrative sex that could cause pregnancy, and possibly a need for contraception and or sex safety decisions. And then they're starting to have a strong need for independence. Something to consider is that typical sex ed at this age has an innate focus on pleasure and arousal for boys, but more about bodily function for females. So there's definite language around erections and ejaculation for the boys, and then for females, it's menstruation and pregnancy. And so there's a huge gap in the discussion around pleasure for females, what that looks like in their body, how do you tell if they're aroused, things like that. This can lead to confusion for girls, and when they aren't understanding what's going on in their body, that many adults still don't understand. Something interesting is that the clitoris was the last organ in the human body to be identified. It wasn't added to medical journals until 1998. It wasn't until as recent as 2005 full anatomy was accurately described in medical publications. And currently, not all medical procedures performed on females factor in implications of this organ. An example of that is the clitoris has like 10 to 14,000 nerve endings that go like up into the groin area and above the pubic bone. And there's some surgeries like laparoscopic surgeries that can damage that, so women can't have orgasms anymore. And so that just speaks to that gender gap that's happening between males and females, and can lend towards shame that females can feel. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the comments. There's some comments here. Oh, thinking specifically about anatomy words that seem okay to share to me. Um, okay. You let me know if I didn't answer that question about the anatomy words. I see that that was a comment from earlier. All good. Okay, good. Someone said I have 16, 13, and 3 girls. I still don't talk to my 16, 13-year-old about sex yet because I don't know where to start. I was born in Africa. My mom never talked to me about sex. Yeah, that's tough. That's very common. Very, very common. Common here in the United States too. And I know other countries, it's even more like we do not talk about that whatsoever. So with kids, with caregivers that have kids that are already in these teen years, it can be harder to start those conversations now, right? And you can certainly reach out to me outside of this presentation, and we can have a conversation on the phone. But I'll speak to this a little bit. If you're trying to start these conversations now as your kids are already teenagers, then it's okay to start with, this is how I was raised. I was raised, we do not talk about this. And this is uncomfortable for me. This is hard for me. And, you know, if you do have that shame there because it wasn't talked about, which for a lot of people lends them to believe there's something wrong talking about it or acting like people do it, you can say that too. And I want to change that. I really want to change that. I want you to be able to be open with me and honest with me, and I don't want that for you. And just start with small conversations, like 5-minute conversations. Just start with that. Like, hey, this is what I want to do moving forward. It's hard for me, but just so you know, I'm going to be trying. And look for those natural moments that can just happen, like when you take them shopping for clothes, you know, like if they're picking out a shirt and it's tight in the chest, saying like, you know, bringing up the body language, you know. Um, Also, when kids take health class, I really encourage you to read through the curriculum. That creates an incredible opportunity to have conversations with your kids. Like, hey, you're going to be taking this class. You can be in it or not. I'm going to read through it, and then I'm going to have a follow-up conversation with you about it because you may not believe that some of the information is accurate or what you want your child to believe. And so it really creates this natural conversation that's sort of built in, I want to say. Um, It can also, and you can also preface it with something like, hey, I know you're going to have to take this class, and I want to give you the information ahead of time in hopes that it makes you less comfortable for when you have to talk about it in class. Oh my gosh. Trying to go back to the chat. There we go. There was another comment. Someone had their first experience last year with their 10-year-old. It was hard. It was not expected, but was necessary at the time. Yeah, and you know, a lot of times these conversations, if we're reacting, we're having reactive conversations instead of proactive conversations. And so my hope with getting some of this information is you're gaining some tools about how to have those proactive conversations ahead of time rather than those reactive where you're like, gosh, I have to address this. I'll just share, I mean, I've worked in foster care for 17 years with tens of thousands of families where I could share all kinds of different scenarios, but I don't want to do that. I'll share my own personal experiences. So I remember when one of my boys, 3 boys, was in kindergarten, and there was a boy who thought it was really funny to go around and grab all the boys' penises. Like that's something he kept doing. And we had to have a conversation about how to keep his body safe. We had a conversation, and this was before I really knew, you know, this was 10 years ago, before I knew how to be proactive with it rather than reactive. I remember being very reactive and feeling really uncomfortable with it. Actually, I would say I felt scared because I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't know. And so I know that feeling of like, have to address this. I don't know how. I don't want to. And I'm hoping that you get to a place where you can say, okay, I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to get ahead of these conversations. I'm going to be talking to them as they're coming into these milestones so everyone feels more prepared, you and the child. I assure you it feels just as uncomfortable for the child as they're getting into these body changes or these scenarios of exposure. It feels just as uncomfortable for them because they don't understand. Um, so here's some of those conversations we want to have with this age range. So 10 to 18, again, remember, like that's such a huge age range, but definitely by 10, we're introducing deodorant. Um, by 10, we have purchased it for them and we're giving it to them. Like, hey, you might not want to start using this yet, but when you start to notice you're stinky, there it is, right there under the sink. And that is a good gateway for, um, also, by the way, now that you are in an age where you might start to need deodorant, here are some other changes you might start to notice in the next year or so. And so just kind of saying them, right? Like that could be less than a 2-minute conversation. Thinking about the person that said they have a 16 and 13-year-old. I'm going to come back to that one in another example. So continue to discuss how to keep their bodies safe, discussing safe and unsafe touches. Really be clear on the difference. One thing to know is that peer-to-peer sexual assault is highest between the ages of 10 and 12 years old as hormones and curiosity increases in those ages. And if and when kids aren't taught how to say no. So think back to what I said, like talking about this doesn't make it happen. Talking about it prevents it from happening. Not only from the victim, but also the perpetrator. Like that 10 to 12-year-old range, a lot of times it's not someone who is intending harm. They're not trying to actually assault someone different than like a rapist. It's a child that doesn't have those parameters in their mind of you can't just go and fondle somebody because you're curious, you know? We need to give parameters for a lot of different reasons. And then introducing and deciding on sanitary products for female bodies. So pads, period underwear, cups, tampons. What is used may change with experience managing periods and comfort preference. So this is a great opportunity to bring up if you have like a teenager where you're just now starting to have these conversations, this is a great way to bring it up if they've already started the period. Like, hey, I know that you've been using pads, but I want to discuss some other options with you and just let that be a gateway to a conversation. A good idea for girls that haven't had their period yet is to come up with a period kit. So they have in like a Ziploc bag, a change of underwear, they have a pad or the period underwear, whatever they want to use, maybe some wipes, and just have it ready for if they get that when they're away from home, if they get it for the first time away from home. And even having that on girls at all times for a number of years because they tend to not think about planning ahead. It might be less predictable in the beginning, so just always have it. And then for teaching privacy eyes, so kids, once they start developing bodies and figures, and a lot of schools don't really seem to reinforce dress code. So I have 2 kids in high school. Like I know how a lot of teenage girls dress. And there's a lot of skin showing and there's a lot of curves and there's a lot of everything. And so it's a really fine line because we want girls to have self-expression and not feel shame, but then also like it can make people feel uncomfortable. And so one thing you can teach your kids, boys or girls, is to just give privacy eyes. So if they see something that makes them feel uncomfortable, they can just look away. Like that's a way for them to have privacy for themselves. And also maybe if they think it's being respectful to that person, just keep their eyes on their eyes or just entirely look away. I saw a couple comments. Yes. So I got another message sent to me. My family of origin started these conversations very young. what is sex came up when the twins, when we were 5. One thing to know is any person can make them uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, it's tough, especially when we're considering like gender roles and gender differences. There's certain things that can make anyone feel uncomfortable. Absolutely. Having these conversations frequently doesn't necessarily negate that it's going to make anyone uncomfortable, which I really want to reinforce is different than shame. So, especially when we live in a society where females are hyper sexualized, and then there is so much shame put on females for various reasons. It's very confusing. It creates really conflicting feelings for a lot of girls. And then for men, I'm not one, but I imagine it can be really challenging to want to be respectful, but then have these conversations and not appear as though, you're being inappropriate. And so I know I want to come across as though this is just going to be easy peasy. It's going to be a piece of cake. Just have these conversations all the time. It's always nuanced. There's always a lot behind it, our own personal experiences, our cultural experiences, what country we come from, what part of our country, this country we're from, our religious upbringing. Those things I mentioned earlier all play a role in how we come to these conversations. Um, Someone said we did her first heating pad, chocolate pads, favorite snacks. Oh, I love that. I had never thought of that. Adding to a period pack like some chocolates and getting him like a heating pad, just kind of celebrating. Yeah, a diary to track their period. I love that. And a period tracking app. That's a fantastic idea. Yeah. Um, then another comment, women and other kids can also abuse the kids we're talking to. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, kids can be abused from men or women or their peers. It's less common for women to be the abuser, but it absolutely can happen. And so if you have a kid come into your care, that's tricky, right? Because you don't know if that history is there, and that can really make these conversations challenging, which is why in the beginning I really preface that if you have a child that comes into your care that has a history of sexual abuse or neglect, do not just enter into these conversations. That is not a safe thing to do. That's not being trauma informed. And even if there wasn't information, but their body language is, be watching for cues and clues that they are so dysregulated and uncomfortable having this conversation with you. And be permission based. Like, I want to talk to you about, I'll pick something off of this list. Um, I'm just going to use like a really obvious, something to me that would be obvious that you could bring up. Let's say you have a 17-year-old boy in your care and he's masturbating because you're finding the stiff, dirty socks, right? And you want to talk to him about doing that somewhere where it's not in the laundry and you're not going to come across it. Okay, so that seems normal and natural to not normal and natural. It's uncomfortable, right? But like you want to address it. I would first ask permission, like, hey, this is something, I noticed something that I want to talk with you about. It has to do with masturbation, which is a totally normal thing. All boys are driven to do it. And I want to ask your permission first. Can we talk about this? And if it's just total shutdown, then you have to respect that, right? We want to be trauma informed with these kids that are coming from traumatic situations. So I hope that that's helpful too, of like, you can't have these conversations with all the kids, knowing the population that we're speaking to. Okay, where did I leave off? Oh, teaching privacy eyes, and then when and where it's okay to masturbate. Like I just kind of brought that up, but like, letting them know in your bedroom or when you're in the shower. Um, depending on how you discovered that they were doing that, maybe that conversation never needs to happen because it's never been indicated that that's happening. And so they have done a good job of just managing it on their own. You know, that's okay. We don't have to bring every single one of these things up. We do want to bring it up when it's appropriate and relevant. Normalize that pleasure is important for girls too. Talking about pleasure feels like in the female body. This may be difficult for many adults to articulate because it wasn't taught to them, so they may not even know for themselves. So a lot of adult females don't even know how to articulate this. They don't know how to articulate what it looks like, what it feels like, and so that can be challenging. Why would you want to even have this conversation with a girl? When this may be a relevant conversation is if you have a teenage girl that you know has entered into a relationship with a partner and they are having a sexual relationship, you would want to talk with them about making sure that, hey, I just want to check in, like, are you having sex because he wants to? Are you wanting to have emotional connection? Do you think it feels good? Do you want it to feel good and it doesn't feel good? Like, what are you wanting to get out of this? Like, if they've already made that decision. Um, so we're really looking for those opportunities where it naturally becomes a conversation. We're not just inserting these at random because they're a certain age. We're looking for those open doors that tell us, okay, it's time to have this conversation. We're not going to be talking to our 11-year-old about female pleasure. Like that's not really appropriate. But if we have a teen in our home that we know is in an active sexual relationship, that would be more appropriate to have conversation. Protection for females and males, including all sexual orientation. So one thing in the health classes curriculum that I have read, certainly haven't read them all, but the ones that I have read do not include information for the LGBTQ plus population. And so providing information about just condoms is not inclusive. So we want to also give it, if you have a child in your home that is a female and is attracted to females, talking to them about dental dams as protection for themselves. And just know that they do not include that information. And so if you have a child that has that orientation, you really need to tailor it to their specific needs. And then checking in with them about emotional or just helping continue that emotional intelligence, continuing to use that emotion coaching, giving them those emotion words so that they're able to effectively communicate to you and or their partner if they're in a romantic and sexual relationship with a partner. Being able to communicate, this made me sad when we had sex and he just took off, or this really made me frustrated that he said if I don't have sex with him, he's going to break up with me. Like, give them that language to be able to describe the circumstances within themselves and to a trusted person and to the person they're in a relationship with, which ties into effective communication with partners. So, there's no way for kids to learn how to have healthy there's no way for anyone to learn how to have healthy communication in sexual relationships if they're not taught, or at least take time to research it and learn how to do it themselves. And teenagers are not typically going to be Googling, how do I have effective communication with my sex partner or my romantic partner? And so, giving them some real basics about how to check in with them about that stuff. And then contraception, if that's something that you and your child decide to use, condoms, birth control, a patch, whatever. And then discuss emotional implications of sexual relationships. Just make sure there's an understanding that if you enter into a relationship like that with someone, oftentimes it can change how you feel about them, how they feel about you. It's not a guarantee that the relationship is going to be permanent. Just try to help them have an understanding about that. And then again, just reiterating, all these topics are to be covered over a range of years and multiple conversations over the years. And then some quick facts about pornography. 90% of boys will see porn by the age of 10, oftentimes by accident while searching for other things on a screen at home, and more often than you would even believe it happens at school. So just knowing that 10 is absolutely 100% the age to talk to kids about, boys specifically, but girls too, about porn. Like that is a hard 10. 10 is the age. Porn is not representational of showing consent typically. It typically does not show healthy communication about likes and dislikes. It oftentimes heavily focuses on acts for male pleasure rather than female or mutual pleasure. It is intended for adults, not children. It does not show natural scaffolding that typically takes place when beginning any type of romantic relationship that leads to sex. It can easily be mistaken for typical behavior because it's readily available. I mean, they can go to Pornhub and see like 100 of the same thing and think, oh, that means that's normal. And it very much is not normal for kids 18 and under. It is well accepted by sex therapists that porn is not healthy or safe for children to watch. This is a book I highly recommend. Good Pictures and Bad Pictures, Porn Proofing Today's Young Children. I read this with all my boys. Highly recommend it. And then we want to teach kids what to do when they see porn. So when they come across it, close out of the browser so they don't see it anymore. And then using a helmet analogy can be helpful, that looking away from the porn is protecting their brain. Tell a trusted adult how they came across it. This may help the adult know how to adjust parental controls on the device that was used. Help kids understand that it is normal and natural to be curious about it, but that porn is movies for adults, not children. They are not like rated R movies that many teenagers watch. They're rated X or triple X, and they are not safe for kids to watch under any circumstances. We want to help kids understand the dangers of watching porn. It can lead to false sense of reality for what a partner wants or likes in a sexual relationship, which can lead to disappointment for them in their own sexual experiences. It can lead to porn addiction, which can have lasting negative effects and very hard to overcome. What leads to porn addiction is because every time they see it, they get a dopamine hit. It's just like any other addiction. There's that constant dopamine hit, and they have to do it more and more and more to continue to get that same effect that they're looking for. Often what happens is the type of porn they're watching really escalates to the point where they're watching really disturbing things. Watching porn can lead to isolation from lack of interactions and relationships that mirrors what they saw. And then I think lastly, we want to, oh, there was a comment here. What if teens want resources for what sex should be like? Oh my gosh, that comes up so often, so often. I went to a sexological conference in Colorado this last year, and that it was like thousands of sex therapists from all over the world, and that came up, like, how do we show them healthy examples? And there is no clear answer on that. We don't want to show them quote unquote soft porn. It's really conversations about like what feels good for your body, what feels good with that person, which is hard conversations to have, you know. It's about safety, feeling safe, feeling pleasure, for both people. But yeah, that's an ongoing question. I don't have a great answer for that one. Teaching consent. So consent is mentioned at every age range of developmental milestones I just covered because it is a topic to bring up continuously throughout childhood. And if you're a caregiver who is just now starting these conversations and you have a teenager, that's another easy gateway conversation. Like, hey, I want to talk about consent. I want to talk about, you know, how to keep your body safe, and we'll go into some more examples here. But this is a great gateway conversation that isn't necessarily talking about sex, but it pertains directly to sex. So, some things to consider: sensory differences. So for people that have sensory processing disorder, there will be certain parts of their body that are excruciating to be touched. And that doesn't mean they don't like the person, but they need to be able to, they need to feel comfortable to say, hey, I don't like my stomach to be touched, but it feels good when you touch my arm in that way. So back to someone's question about, how do we teach them healthy? How did you phrase it? What if teen wants resources for what sex should be like? Yeah, teaching what kind of touch feels good. That's one part of it. So sensory differences and being comfortable to say like, no, I don't like being touched like that, but you can touch me here. What everyone is comfortable with is different. It's important for boys to know that, like just because they were with this girl and she was okay with this doesn't mean this girl's going to be okay with it. Or if a girl, her friends did this with this boy and they really liked it, that doesn't mean that they're going to like it with a boy or with a girl. So just knowing that every circumstance, every person is different. Porn exposure may give a false sense of what someone thinks they like. So if they're watching porn and they see all this stuff, like, oh, that looks fun, and then they get into it, it might not feel like they think it would. And so they need to know it's okay if that happens. Again, we really don't want kids watching porn. Teaching kids it's always okay to change their mind. Just because you think you should like something doesn't mean you do. This plays a huge role with individuals who are unsure of their sexual orientation or experimenting to learn what that is or are simply unaware yet. So it's not uncommon for, girls to be experimenting with boys and they don't really like it and they don't know why. Maybe it's because they're actually a lesbian and they just don't know that yet. Maybe it's because it's not the right person. Maybe it's because they're asexual, and asexual is people who just don't get physically stimulated by sexual arousal. There's a lot of reasons that can lead to a person to not like a certain type of interaction. Like we're just barely scratching the surface here, but the bottom line is it's okay. It's okay if they don't like something, or if they liked it with one person and not with another. People who are unsure of their sexual orientation makes a lot of this more confusing for some, really exciting for others. It's really dependent on the person. And then lastly, no is a complete sentence, even after someone says yes. Someone can always, always, always say no. It's important for our girls to know that, and and it's important for the boys to know it too. So can anyone think of anything else they think is important to teach kids about consent? Or what do you wish had been taught to you? Okay, you put a comment in there if you think of something. Um, and then lastly, thinking of effective communication, human bodies are designed to have sexual organs, desires, and thoughts that begin before children are typically old enough to understand or make rash decisions without proper guidance. The emotions, bodily sensations, and body reactions they have can be confusing, alarming, exciting, and many other things. It is our job to communicate with them to make sense of what is going on in their bodies in a way that is not shaming, but normalizing their natural experiences. And so, if you don't know what to say, another great starting point is I just want to normalize that, like, this is confusing, these bodily changes, or I know it's, embarrassing to wear these shirts because your breasts are bigger now, or, just really normalizing those changes that are happening. And then speaking to the teens, mostly effective communication with them is going to look like eye contact, unless they have ADHD or autism or very introverted. That might be uncomfortable for them. And even for some adults and kids, eye contact with these conversations isn't comfortable, and that's totally fine. Going on a drive, whatever. Having devices put away, having some other type of thing they can focus on to take away from the awkwardness of the conversation is okay. Having open body language, soft facial expression, trying to have your voice sound calm, being respectful, paraphrasing back what they're saying to us, not interrupting, consider processing speed, waiting for silence. My oldest son, whenever I have these conversations with him, he's like, Mom, when are you going to stop? Mom, 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 mom. And like, he won't say anything else. My middle son loves to have these conversations and give me his thoughts, and he gets kind of like a silly look on his face, but I'll say something and then he'll want to give me his thoughts. And so they're all so, so different. And so when my oldest is uncomfortable, I start to feel uncomfortable for him. Versus my middle, I'm a lot more like casual about it. And so the way we react can even be largely based on our kids. But we still want to maintain, really having that respectful communication. And then final questions. Whoops. I saw a comment here. Practicing nonverbal cues, lack of consent. Yeah. Yeah. Practicing nonverbal cues, lack of consent. When you're talking about it is a great thing to be bringing up with them. An example I can think of is like, when boys will like whistle at girls. And I know I'm totally stereotyping saying that, but I've just had it done to me so many times. Teaching them what to do in that situation. Or like if someone is looking a boy, I can only speak to my experience as a female. Like if I'm bending over and a boy is looking down my shirt, if that feels invasive to a girl, like teaching her how to handle that situation. Or showing younger kids what it looks like when someone doesn't want to hug. Yeah, walking through that. I love that idea. That's so good. Yeah, and how to get out of that situation. Such a good idea. Maybe talking about it when you see it in movies or cartoons, like it doesn't look like he wants a hug right now, does it? Yes, that's a fantastic idea. Yeah, look for these things in movies too. Absolutely. Like, um, I'm thinking of like the Robin Hood cartoon, like the old Robin Hood cartoon, like the two foxes, Robin Hood and Maid and Miriam, and they're hugging, and they both consent because their cheeks are touching and they both have smiles on their faces and they're embracing and like they both clearly enjoy it. And like that's consent, right? Versus I can't think of a cartoon or example, but it appears apparent when someone doesn't want that contact. So yes, love the idea of looking for examples of what is and is not consent in movies. So, some final questions. What information did you learn that was surprising? How different was this from what you learned as a child? Who do you think should teach kids this information if not from their caregivers? And what resources do you have to find more information about supporting your child's sexual development if they have a different sexual orientation than you?